We are here with myself, Juan Concha, and MacNaughton. We are recording an interview for the Taos News Tempo magazine summer series on equality and prejudice in our own community. And got some questions for Mrs. MacNaughton. So, Anne, I believe the community is very familiar with yourself, so I'm just going to jump right into the questions. Does Taos suffer from systemic racism?
Absolutely. Oh, what, 400 years or so? Actually, it didn't start with the Europeans. You know, we are always prejudiced against whoever the other guy is. That's just human. So, you know, but systemically in the government and everything else, yeah, since, you know, at least since Oñate, I'm going to go all the way to Coronado, though. He's the guy that kind of started it.
Right.
What we're still dealing with.
Okay. What, if any, forms of racism or prejudice have you experienced in Taos?
Oh, goodness. I have certainly experienced the bias of local people against outsiders and against people who are Anglo-American. I've experienced it in the schools, of course, because I worked for the schools. I experienced it with the tribe. I experienced it with the local gendarmes. You know, I learned really early on that if I had a speeding ticket, I better take an Hispanic man with me before I go see the judge, even though he didn't do anything but accompany me. But the difference in what happens to me when I'm in front of a judge is huge. And there it is. And it's just how people see me. So they lay a bunch of prejudice on me. It's really interesting since I grew up under Jim Crow in a segregated area of the country in the South to see what I was appalled at from my own family's dealing with people of color is exactly what I get thrown back at me. It's interesting, you know. I expected it, so it's not a surprise, but it hurts me, and I have no way of fixing that. So an example of it is that initially, when I started working for the school system, one of the programs that I was in was Indian Ed. And although they were having a hard time finding people that were certified to teach in that program, nevertheless, although there was a big need for people to help out with the kids in the school system, being a bridge pretty much between the school system and the kids and their home, the home life. Nevertheless, I was stopped at 19 and a half hours. I was given 19 and a half hours every week of work time. Of course, I worked much more than that, but they stopped me at 19 and a half hours because that way they didn't have to pay benefits. Mm. And there was definitely collusion between the people who were running the Indian Ed program at the time and the people who were running the high school at the time when I was let go from that program. And right away, they put in somebody who suddenly was getting 35 hours a week. I don't know how that, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an example. It's real subtle. It's real undercover. I can see it. I'm sure the people that were doing that to me knew what they were doing. But there is absolutely no recourse for me. I could not do anything about it. And how does that affect me now? I get a much smaller Social Security benefit, and I get a much smaller, the worst of it is that I get a much smaller pension from the New Mexico Department of Education. Pension that I have is much smaller due to, in part, to that, not recognizing the amount of work that I was doing, only due to the fact that I was an outsider. So,
Yeah.
and that was it. So,
All right.
outsider. We're talking about race and culture,
Yeah.
but outside and inside is the same thing.
Yeah.
So an outsider can bring a different color and a different culture. It doesn't matter. An outsider, I've seen stuff around here where an outsider is the same culture, bringing the same language, comes from another little village up here in the northern part of New Mexico, being discriminated against in Taos because they come from Las Vegas or Mora, or, they're an outsider.
Yeah, right. Now, you started talking about growing up in the South, right? Or
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
particular part of the country where segregation was pretty big, right? So, do you see any reflections of the past in the current state of civil unrest with the Black Lives Movement?
Oh, it's heartbreaking. First time I ever did any kind of public demonstration was civil rights in Austin, Texas. We were demonstrating against we were demonstrating against business owners so there was a barber who wouldn't cut black hair. There was a gas station owner, actually, that was Darryl Royal, the coach of the football team, UT football team, owned a gas station that would not pump black gas. I went to the University of Texas. There were a handful of black students at that school. That's a public school for the whole state, and there were fewer than 24 in that school at the time. So I'm going, okay, I did that. I thought we fixed it. Why are we doing it again? Why do we have to do it again? So yeah, it's a total reflect. Obviously it didn't get fixed.
Right. Okay. In your opinion, how well has President Trump responded to the current BLM?
Well, he's certainly done absolutely everything wrong that it's possible to do. Yeah, absolutely everything.
In your opinion, what could he have done better?
Acknowledge that those are real people. Acknowledge that Black Lives Matter is a serious movement. It's been here for a while, some decade or so. Don't be putting people down who are bringing you information you didn't know. Accept them and acknowledge them. So that's just a change in attitude.
Right. What solutions would you like implemented to heal the ancestral trauma minority groups suffer, not only throughout the country, but right here in our own community?
We got to have a truth and reconciliation scene of
Like the
some
Mandela
sort.
way.
Yeah, it may take us years. We need to do it here in this town. We need to do it in Espa. We need to do it in Santa Fe. We need to do it in everywhere, because that's the only way to put the people on all sides into the same room where they can begin to acknowledge and recognize each other. Working with therapists the whole time, but where we get to say, this happened to my brother, well, that happened to my father, well, and then we get it out there and we get to really talk about it, because people are carrying, like you say, ancestral. We're carrying centuries of stuff. And people are upset about Oñate, but I'm upset about Coronado. And then we could add to Vargas. It's
Right.
It's just it keeps happening.
Yeah.
For me, and it's not being talked about yet, but we'll get to it. Kearney. What about Kearney?
Yeah.
What about what happened here? What about totally what happened here not that long ago?
The Clinton P. Andersons.
Well, there you're bringing it up even closer into, even more recent, But, I think we may or may not have accepted that Spain conquered this place in the 1500s and, totally changed the world. We may or may not accept that. It doesn't matter, because it was sort of rubber stamped by Oñate. And then after Oñate, comes to Vargas to resettle everything, and he does the same thing, exactly the same thing, including genocide. And then we have Kearny and the Army of the West who marches in to Santa Fe in 1846 and immediately starts a fight with the people who live here. Okay, maybe the people who live here started the fight. It doesn't matter.
But why though?
Why is because these people were just coming in and doing this whole imperialist thing of saying, the Catholics did it this way, the Americans did it this way. Same thing.
Yeah, right. One held the cross, the other held the sword.
Yeah.
All right. So, now that we're talking about it, across the U.S., groups are calling for the removal of statues depicting certain historical figures. Here in New Mexico, figures such as Oñate have fallen into those crosshairs. What approach to these demands do you feel is the best route to take?
Oh, absolutely. Again, it should be a group project. So, historians, museum owners, representatives of various groups need to all be, civic and otherwise, need to all be in the same meeting. And obviously, we should not be honoring people who were traitors. So that takes care of the CSA, the Confederates, totally. There should never be any way of honor. Should put a plaque there saying, on this site, Robert E. Lee surrendered his sword. But don't put a statue of Robert E. Lee on a horse.
Right.
So, same thing here. Get Oñate out of here. I was hard, and the man who started that center down there was a very good friend of mine, Esteban Arellano. He was a very special person, a really good person, a person who supported his culture without any kind of prejudice at all. And yet, when he put up that statue of Oñate, and I just went, oh no. And then friends of mine took the foot. That was very good. That was very well done, And that is the sort of response that needs to happen. Those kinds of ironic and small but making a major statement kind of responses, are the appropriate ones. So take those statues down, talk about them, put them in a museum with a history museum. Don't get rid of them. I'm also an artist. Don't get rid of somebody's work.
Right.
But if it is not supportive of the civic space at the moment, put it in a place where it can be of use. And history is, of course, valuable. The reason that we're repeating this ancestral trauma over and over again is somebody sort of forgot, I guess. Yeah.
Brush it off.
Yeah.
Gave the general stuff, none of the details.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was impressed, speaking of the details, I was impressed with reading information about Acoma that I didn't know in the newspapers, in the Taos News.
Right.
I had learned it differently than that. But that's the other thing about it, is that all of our stories are different. Okay, so my ancestors fought on both sides of the Civil War, and I am not going to diss them for doing what was appropriate for their time period. They were not being evil, they were trying to be good. The larger project was evil, maybe, but, I can't diss them for that. So the same thing, I can't say that this guy was bad or that guy was bad. They were doing what they were taught to do. It's up to us to put them in context.
Right. Okay. Now, here specifically in Taos, some members of the community have called for the removal of Kit Carson's name from our public park. Others have called for the removal of Padre Martinez's statue from the plaza. What are your thoughts on this?
Padre Martinez's statue is the ugliest piece of art, public art, I have ever seen in my life. I have no opinion about whether or not it should be up there, but to honor Padre Martinez, actually I do it shy, but it probably shouldn't be. But get rid of it because it's really ugly. And they've done that in this town more than once. We've had public art. There was a public sculpture in front of the convention center before it turned into the UNM, and it was equally inappropriately ugly. And that often happens with public art because you have a committee choosing it, you know.
Right.
So it's often. But I don't know what the excuse for the Padre Martinez thing, but it's horrible, and it is not honoring Padre Martinez's memory right now because it's ugly. So that's the first thing. Second thing, there are some places where it might be appropriate to have a sculpture or a bust of Padre Martinez, but I'm not going to say the plaza is it. The plaza was the scene of a huge massacre. More than one. That Padre Martinez participated in 1847. That's like putting a statue of Robert E. Lee up where he surrendered, you know.
Yeah.
Don't be doing that. Don't be dishonoring the complexity of what was going down in 1846 and 1847 by picking one person, you know, who has a lot of descendants, but all sides have descendants here. So, you know, that's what. As for Kit Carson Park, not anything you can do about Kit Carson Forest. It's going to be named Kit Carson Forest. We have Kit Carson Museum. That's fine. We have Kit Carson Road. That's fine. Name the park Taos Municipal Park.
Neutral.
Neutral. Yeah.
What about the electric co-op?
What about what now?
The electric co-op.
I write a check to Kit Carson every month. I just as soon write it to somebody else, but I'm writing it to Kit Carson. Okay, whatever. Make it George Washington, I'll write a check to George Washington every month. I think it's irrelevant, basically.
Well, you know, myself being Native American, it does hurt a little bit. Writing a check to Kit Carson
be paying
every month.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Taos Electric Company.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, that would be fine.
Again, neutral.
Yeah, again, neutral.
You know.
Yeah.
When it comes to certain particulars, yes.
Well, you know what? There is no more neutral name than the word Taos. It don't mean anything. It has no meaning. It only has a context, and here we are.
Now, this kind of ties all back into everything that we spoke about. How does one honor the suffering of the oppressed while preserving the history? Particularly here in Taos.
Yeah, so first you got to have a place to preserve it. We don't have any. No.
The
We
visitor
have
center
the
closed,
Bent Museum, we have the Kit Carson Museum, we have the Harwood Museum. None of them are adequate. We don't have an archives. So if you happened to have, say, stashed in your grandma's house, a copy of the first book, school book, that Padre Martinez's press printed, the only thing you could do to preserve it right now would be to turn it over to the people in Santa Fe, at the archives in Santa Fe.
Yeah, the state archives.
Yeah, so that's not okay. It needs to be here. We need to be able to take our own children and say, see here, this is your grandmother's letters from World War I. This is, you know, that all of that needs to happen. So it needs to be multicultural to the extent that it can, and I recognize that the tribe's input or, you know, or support might be smaller than the Hispanic one for their own reasons. But still, it needs to be multicultural, and we definitely need a large Hispanic library here that holds archives, artifacts, and that god-awful statue of Padre Martinez. But the tribe needs its own museum. And I don't know that the tribe's ever talked about that. But it definitely needs its own museum. Right now, I don't know where the Blue Lake letters and treaties and all of that stuff is. I know who used to have them. Maybe he still has them. But it needs to not be in his house, if that's the case. It needs to be in a neutral place.
in 3-inch thick bulletproof glass, just like the amendments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It needs to be done properly.
Right.
I was horrified when I saw that the letters about Blue Lake were just they were put in what I saw was put in lamination, which is an archivist you should never ever do. It's the worst thing in the world to do. Yeah.
Chemicals.
Yeah, chemicals. Yeah,
Yeah.
put it in a gas. Yeah. So anyway, but that would take a museum. But let me tell you why. And this tribe is reluctant to expose itself in any way, and reluctant for all kinds, and not very fond of things that are written on paper in the first place. So, you know, it's not like they're going to go, whoa, let's have a museum and put all our paper in it. But think about this. So I went back to 2 places a summer ago that I had not been to since I was in my 20s. And one of the places was Washington, D.C., where I went to the American Indian Museum. And one of the places was in Canada, in Victoria, Canada, where I went to the Provincial Museum that I had been to as a younger person. I was initially appalled at the Native American Museum in Washington because I had already seen this material before it went into the Native American Museum in Manhattan, an incredible museum of Native American artifacts. In Denver, an incredible museum of Native American artifacts. What happened to those artifacts? They didn't go to the Native American Museum. Or if they did, initially, they got repatriated. So, my example of both a loss and also the new thing that's happening has to do with the sculpture that I had seen when I was younger in the Provincial Museum in Victoria, in Canada, British Columbia, Canada. It was the only rendering I have ever seen of that an artist did beautifully of one element into another perfectly. So he used laminated wood and he made water. So where the water peaked, you could see the rings of the wood. And he made a 3/4 size seal hunting kayak with people in it, with all of the material, and the water was splashing, and it was a thing about as big as this room. It was incredibly gorgeous. And so I knew that was in that museum, and I took my son and his new wife there to see that, and it isn't there. Why not? It went back to that artist's tribe, and is in their museum, in their village. And I can go see that. I would have to get in a boat, because there's no roads, and go to that. So they have it set, they have it where it belongs, with them. So that's why I would say Taos Pueblo maybe should start thinking about creating a space for its own materials, not just historic, but artistic and otherwise. I mean, I know there's a lot that you can't show. Don't show that stuff. I'm not talking about that stuff. That's what stays where it stays. But, in terms of relating to the government, that could be in a museum.
Yeah.
Well,
there have been talks. In fact, I'm doing another interview with Ilona Spruce later on this week for the same thing.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to her about it, because, there's that like almost unspoken law to be the type of artist that isn't going to utilize the sacred for their financial benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
yeah.
It happens often within our own tribe.
Sure.
So that's really the big hurdle, the big stepping stone that we have to get over in order to have a museum.
You mean what you're saying is that you would have to, the curator would have to decide if this was okay in this museum because it has a turtle shell in it that his brothers used to dance with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some rules have to be made.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
groundwork has to be laid out,
Yeah.
for sure. Now, this is the big question. What steps does Taos need to take to protect its most unique quality, its cultural diversity?
I'm going to say, to the extent that it is legal, charge people who don't live here a whole lot of property tax. And if they are doing B&Bs or what, Airbnb
Yeah.
with their house, then I don't think it's legal to take it away from them. I don't think we get to do that in this country since somebody bought it. But maybe we could add some sort of obnoxious tax or something, for just, because that's what's hurting us is outsiders. So here I am, an outsider, and I can see it. I can see what's happening. I got here accidentally. I didn't come here willingly. I was running away from a bad situation, so I ended up here. And, I was just driving into town from the north side the other day, and I saw all of these houses that run all the way to ranchos, all on the foothills. And I'm going, oh, that wasn't here when I first got here. So within 20 years, we have more than doubled, or just about doubled. And we were on the TV for so long, the map just changed today. But we were on the TV for so long we had stabilized our COVID. And we were surrounded by people who were having spikes. So what are people going to do? They're going to come here. It's the COVID vacation now. They have people coming here because they feel like...
Well, Forbes magazine listed us as one of the top 10 places, top 12 places to visit during the pandemic. Taos, New Mexico specifically.
And so that sort of stuff is sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce and the town tourism and the state tourism. And the only reason that I know that is because the art event that I used to be a part of, the Taos Poetry Circus, we had to learn that in order to advertise. And I watched it happen. Then I watched us change this town from having so many people at this time of the year to having this many people at this time of the year. I could see, because I had to tally what I was putting out and what was coming in, and I did surveys of the people who came. I watched it happen over a decade. I had to turn those stats into the town and the county anyway. And I watched my little art event blow the town up by 1,000 people back in the day. And that it was a small amount. The town had 4,000 people living in it at the time. Suddenly there were 6,000 people living in it. The major people in the world of literature moved here during that time period. The Hollywood set that has moved into Secco moved here during that time period. I gave a reading where, what is that guy? He calls himself a poet. He's I'm sorry. Never mind. Vigo. I gave a reading in the patio with others in the patio of the Cafe Tazza. Viggo Mortensen was in the audience. So I'm watching this and I'm going, I'm doing this. Not by myself, but I'm participating in selling this place to outsiders and getting more outsiders to come here at the same time that I'm ruining this place. I put a stockade up around my yard, and I hate it. I can't see out. I feel trapped. Why did I do that? Because everybody who moved in around me, now instead of looking at the foothills, I'm looking at their lights at 10 o'clock at night. Their dog is running into my yard. It's all, suddenly I'm in the middle of a town. I didn't know that was going to happen. I feel like I created Chicago. It's not good. So what do we have to do to fix it? We have to put some limits. We got some limits already. But the fact that that tribal land cuts big chunks out of the middle of this town is going to keep us from expanding at least there. But then there's other places to expand. So I think recognizing that we have limits on water in particular, I do not know whether that was a good or a bad decision, that water decision. I'm not sure, you know. I think it's very bad for people who live in El Prado. But I don't live in El Prado, so maybe I have a well. Maybe I'm okay. I don't know. But just feeling that all of these people have moved in and changed my life, it upsets me. And I don't have ancestors here. So I can imagine what it does to people who have ancestors here. I mean, I planted my roots accidentally, but here I am, and I'm not moving. I have my own blood, flesh and blood are buried here now. So that makes this my home now. And, you know, so yeah, taxation, whatever is possible. Being wiser about our economics. I think having a health center here, improving our hospital, is a really good idea. I think that we can have a marketing center and a health center and a professional center and an educational center here and get along just fine without needing to sell more houses. I really think we don't have to keep selling more houses.
Word, okay. Do you have any other words regarding equality in Taos for the community?
School system has to be fixed. Absolutely has to be fixed. I watched it happen. I was teaching with teachers who were belittling and ruining children's lives right in front of me. There was not a lot I could do beyond what I could do in my own classroom, because the school system supports racism, and it still does. So immediately get rid of every single one of the charter schools. They are public schools. Make them public schools. Right now, the percentage of Anglo-Americans in the schools, in those charter schools, is overwhelmingly dwarfs any of the brown kids that they have in there. And if you look at it, you're going to find out that the Latin in their statistics in one particular school that I'm thinking of, they list Hispanic, Spanish, and they're talking about the soccer kids they've imported from Peru. They're not talking about the people that need that education. I'm not saying their education is bad. I'm saying their education is good. Why don't all of the schools get that same level of education? That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right.
And if that's not fixed, we're never going to get it fixed.
One interviewee had already mentioned the possibility of creating a curriculum that teaches Taos history.
Oh yeah, well I did. You want the boxes are out there.
I mean, but
yeah,
under not necessarily under the broader spectrum of it being Native American studies, but an actual Taos history.
It could be done.
Class.
It could easily be done. You could ask every 7th grade kid to go through one semester class on Taos. You could. Right now, I don't know because I haven't been part of the system for a while, but it was that there was always a one semester New Mexico history class. So this would be perfect.
But I took that
Mexico
class.
History on what?
I took that class, and there was about this. There was like
pictures of
this much of Oñate and like this teeny little squeeze of Taos Pueblo.
And a really big picture of the North House.
Yeah. And a caption.
A caption that didn't tell you anything.
And a full chapter on Oñate and his deeds.
Yeah.
And then like a whole section on the Reconquista.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, Taos is so significant. And we can talk a lot about whatever it is that makes us spiritually energized place. But for whatever reason, we are really significant and have been for long before they put the highways in. We were still an intersection of cultures. And so stuff happened here. And stuff still happens here. So, I mean, I don't think Taos kids know how important Taos is. I really don't think they get it. I don't think they understand, everybody who talks about Popeye as a religious spiritual leader from Okeowinge. Nobody goes, guess why 1680 happened? Guess why? How did that work?
Yeah.
So 1837 needs to be taught too, not just 1846.
Right.
There, all of these. The fact that there was a half Taos Pueblo man who was governor of the state. Who knew that? Nobody knows that.
I didn't even know
You
that.
knew that? Oh. So,
Damn.
Yeah.
Who looked that guy up?
Well, it's 1837. It was the first attempt to get rid of the government that we were starting to have from the before the Americans actually fully got here. But we were already dealing with the Mexican government. We were already dealing with at this point the fact that even though the Gringos had not gotten here with their army, they were here, coming down from Colorado, and all of that. So
Miners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was our very first attempt to overthrow the government, the Mexican government that was in Santa Fe. And so it was, done by, his name is Gonzalez. Can't remember his first name. They killed him for it, as well as a lot of other guys that were involved in it. It actually worked. I mean, he was actually in the governor's palace there. But it didn't work for long.
Wow.
So, that's a sort of, what? I want the name of every one of those guys that the United States people hung. I want plaques on Taos Plaza with the name of those guys. I know some of those names, and if I say it to a Taos guy who knows, they'll recognize it, and they'll say, oh yeah, So I know that in Taos village itself, those names are still passed down. They would be considered freedom fighters. They should be considered freedom fighters. And so they should be honored. I want to have more information out there at the what's that place? It's not Pot Creek. It's the
the Southern Methodist University.
Yeah. That was a post, an army post.
It was an army post.
Yeah, there needs to be information about that. Why was that army post there? Because there wasn't enough grass here to feed all the horses. There was not enough grass for the size of the army they brought. There was more grass going up those canyons and up that way towards Pickeries.
Yeah.
So they kept their horses over there. And that, anyway, there's so much to be told. I was very fortunate to work with Al Ortiz from Okeowinge Pueblo, one of the major PhDs in anthropology, Native American man, and John Kessel, who was a teacher at UNM when I was down there along with Al Ortiz, but to work with both of them to be able to do preliminary oral history of the burning of that church in 1847 at Taos Pueblo.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. One of the things I learned was that Mark Simmons, who everyone considers the premier historian of New Mexico, is a hack. So what he's in his story about the 1846, 1847 revolt. All he did was take other people's information. So there's a guy named Gerard who wrote, there's several people, white guys, who were here during that revolt and wrote their own versions of it. Well, he took their versions and there's the story without ever asking anybody at Taos Pueblo anything. So the version I got, and I recognize again, just like what I was going to say before, is we all tell our own stories, and so my family story is slightly different from somebody else's story, you know, of the same thing.
Right.
But the story I heard, and it was explained to me in such a way that I totally buy it, was that the initial uprising happened at Turley Mill, not with Bent down on the plaza. And it was the alcohol, and it was some serious murder going on there. But it was a revolt against, again, the mountain men coming down from Colorado and beginning to take over. They already had the Spanish coming up here beginning. Now we got the gringos coming over the mountains this way. So it was and then understanding, the other thing I understood was that some of the scouts from the Army of the West had already come over the pass to the village here. And I am really interested in anybody who knows the story about what dance they interrupted and what happened to that dance afterwards. And that, I don't need to say anything more about that on the record, but I'm curious. Anyway, because that's gonna put the dates.
I'm gonna have to ask.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I didn't know anything about a dance going on.
Well,
but I do know about the scouts coming over ahead of time, and
okay,
the Turley Mills thing happening
beforehand.
Just prior.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
like
the Governor Bent thing.
Like 2 days beforehand.
Yeah. And it was, and you're right. It was a drunken mess.
Yeah.
That somebody said something to the wrong person, and it turned into that, and the overboiling or the overspill was what happened to Governor Bent.
That's right.
But by the time Governor Bent was happening, then here comes everything else. But I didn't know about the dance. I'm going to have to ask about that one.
So you can edit this out.
Yeah.
Okay? My understanding was turtle dance.
Probably.
And the massacre happened on February 2nd.
Yeah. Turtle dance usually happens, well, like 30 days prior to that. So, and my understanding was a couple of moon cycles prior.
And so that's the question: was the turtle dance before that at a different time? Because we do have the record of those scouts at what's the name? P starts with a P. The creek that runs out. It's out on the flats back there, and you cross it between Cimarron and Springer or something. Poneal Creek. Yeah, we have the scouts on Poneal Creek. We know when they were there. There were two different groups of them. So which ones went to Mora, because that happened also. People went into Mora first too. And then which ones came over here. And did they interrupt the dance? And was the dance changed in any way but from that time forward? Was it is it now done on a different day because of what they had done? I don't know the answer to that. And if they had, in fact, interrupted the dance, it means they came in the backside of the dance, which is very weird. So, anyway, just saying, what we're talking about stories, we're talking about telling Taos history. So some stuff you can say, some stuff you can't say until you're older. So you give a 7th grade class, and then you have an advanced class at UNM that has the other stuff in it.
Right. The stuff that you can emotionally digest.
Well, and that you can. So here we are talking about a dance that's a sacred dance, and we're talking about when and who and what. That stuff, if you ever discover it, is not for the 7th grade.
No.
That might be for grad school. So that's all I'm saying is that you need it on a basic level, but you also need to develop it further. And if we had our own library, so I think the archives needs to go into that vacant space on the other side of Taos Library, where it's just an empty lot They need to dig it down into the ground because you got to put the archives in the ground. And then make just a small building over it. But make something large enough. And then there is money. There's been big money for that for a long time. And if we were collecting Taos stuff, there would be lots of money to do that. To pay people to... So I would want Larry Torres to talk to his church about donating stuff.
Right.
Not me going out there saying, you got anything? But somebody who was like part of the... Anyway, could make the case for why we should put stuff there. And so my thought is much more about paper than it is about other stuff. I wouldn't want Quanah Parker's fan to be in that museum. I did see Quanah Parker's fan. I think there have been many Quanah Parker's fans. I have seen many Quanah Parker's fans.
Right.
There was one in the Denver Museum, and there was one in Manhattan.
And who's to say he didn't have more than one? He was
Oh,
Quanah
I'm
Parker.
sure he did. And where are they now? Well, presumably, the Cheyenne Arapaho have them somewhere, or the Kiowa have them somewhere, or, some Oklahoma museum has it some. I don't know. Comanche. Is there a Comanche museum? Maybe there is.
Probably.
I don't know. Probably. But that's why I'm saying, if there's a Kiowa Comanche museum out there in Oklahoma, then the tribe here needs a museum.
Right.
It don't need to be open to the public. It just needs to have a place where people who understand how to preserve stuff with gas can take care of the stuff.
Wow. Well, Ann, you've given us and hopefully our readers and viewers a lot to think about. And I thank you for your time. Thank you for your experience and your years being a part of our community here. And thank you so much for inviting us into your home and allowing us to do this.
Thank you for asking. Really. It's important. And I really treasure that you're doing this.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.